Hello, fellow YouTubers and, booktubers and readers. Today, I'm inviting you to a great unveiling. I'm going to open up this package that I sent to myself, so it's no surprise as to what's in here, but I wanted to share the opening of it, the revealing of it. It'll be a statue or a bust of one of the most influential intellectual and political thinkers of the ancient world, and whose thought and ideas still carry a lot of weight today. A man with incredible insight into the human condition, at least I would argue that that's true. A great orator and a rhetorician. Someone who's often regarded as a philosopher, but he really wasn't a philosopher, but he was a lifelong student of philosophy. And that man is the Roman statesman Marcus Tullius Cicero. So, without further ado, let's get to the great revealing here. I've already removed some of the outer packaging. This is, by the way, Cicero, or the word revealing, comes from the Greek word for apocalypse that we usually translate as apocalypse. The word apocalypse has got nothing to do with the end of the world. It just means a revelatory vision or unpackaging a present or a gift, even if it is to oneself. Okay, let's take a while to clear that up. There we go. Wish I had a drum roll. Not necessary. Perhaps undignified for a person of Cicero's caliber. For those of you who don't know, Cicero was born in 106 BC, or 106 years before the birth of Christ, or before the beginning of the Common Era. He will be very well known to the Romans for his oratory, for his political ideals, and today we would regard Cicero as kind of like a lawyer. He knew a great deal about Roman law. We've got a number of his speeches before the courts of Rome, where he would be defending someone convicted of a crime or prosecuting someone convicted of a crime. We've got a lot of his speeches and a lot of his letters. He wrote a lot of letters. Prolific letter writer. We've got hundreds of them. The significance of his letter writing is he gives us a behind-the-scenes look at some of the major players of the day. And Cicero knew them all. He knew Julius Caesar. He knew Mark Antony. He met Cleopatra, didn't care for her. But some of the other major players that might be a little obscure to you unless you follow Roman history. So there he is, Cicero. Marcus Tullius Cicero. This is heavy duty. I think it's actually made of marble. I don't know if you can see his name is actually carved in here in the Roman style. Just M. Cicero, Marcus Cicero. They don't give the middle name or the gen name, as they would call it. There he is, Cicero. I've got all of his works. I've read them all except for a couple of his speeches I haven't gotten around to yet. I hope to someday soon. There's a famous quote attributed to Cicero that many of you might have heard of. It says, "A room without books is like a body without a soul." I've seen this quote everywhere. I've seen it on T-shirts. I've seen it on refrigerator magnets. Unfortunately, Cicero never said that. It's the kind of thing he might have been sympathetic to. It's the kind of thing he might have said. The quote is actually only traced back about 100 years to the writer G.K. Chesterton, who himself may have borrowed it from another writer of about that same era, the early 1900s. Cicero did say he wrote something similar to that in one of his letters to Atticus. And Atticus was one of Cicero's lifelong friends. He was talking about his slave, Tyrannio, had rearranged the books on his shelf. And Cicero, well, I've got the quote here for you. Hold on one second. Look at that. Ooh, it's magnificent. The actual quote. I won't give you the Latin because my Latin pronunciation is terrible. I was taught Latin not to speak it, but to read it. So I'm not going to go there. But he was talking about his slave, Tyrannio. He says, "Since Tyrannio has arranged my books for me, my house seems to have had a soul added to it," which is kind of saying the same thing, but certainly an attitude that Cicero would have appreciated. He was a real intellectual. He was often entangled in all the political movements of his day, which were incredible, to say the least. He was witnessing the collapse of the Roman Republic and the rise of one-man rule. He's sometimes regarded as a philosopher too, but that's not accurate. I see this a lot in student papers, and I can tell they've been looking up stuff on Wikipedia, which isn't always the most accurate source. Cicero was a student of philosophy, a great admirer of philosophy, but he never contributed any unique philosophical thoughts of his own, or he doesn't create his own school of philosophy. He identified with what were known as the academic skeptics, or skepticism. It didn't mean quite the same thing in Cicero's time as it means now, but kind of close. But he was very sympathetic to the Stoics and Stoicism. I read somewhere someone said he was Stoic adjacent. He wrote a lot about Stoicism. A lot of our information about Stoicism, a lot of the details about that philosophical movement we get from Cicero's own writings. What kind of held him back was his wealth and his status, two things that Stoics are supposed to kind of turn their noses up at. But he was a skeptic, but he knew philosophy. He wrote extensively about philosophy, but he was describing other philosophical schools from Greece that we would be pretty much unaware of had it not been for Cicero's interest in them and willing to write about them. As I said, Cicero was in the forefront of pretty much everything. He witnessed Julius Caesar's assassination. There has been some question of whether he had something to do with that conspiracy. It's interesting, of his many letters, and there are hundreds of them, the letters leading up to that event and immediately after it, if there were any letters, we have none. So someone was scrubbing the record for some reason. He ran afoul of Mark Antony. He did not like Antony. And he wrote some pretty nasty speeches about Antony in the Roman Senate. They're called the Philippics. Oh, and by the way, Cicero's most famous speeches are the ones against his orations against Catiline, who was a Roman aristocrat who tried to overthrow the Republic by leading a revolution. Cicero uncovered that and stopped that, so that's kind of how he got his famous name. He saved Rome, but he couldn't save it from its eventual fate. Well, anyway, Cicero had made some pretty damning speeches against Mark Antony. After Julius Caesar was assassinated, Cicero left Rome, went to his villa in the south. He tried to persuade Julius Caesar's stepson, Octavian, to restore the Republic, but Octavian gets to Rome, where he comes under the sway of Mark Antony. And Octavian, by the way, will eventually become Augustus, the first emperor. Well, anyway, Mark Antony essentially draws up a list of enemies, his enemies, Octavian's enemies, the enemies of the spirit of Julius Caesar, Caesar's assassins, and all these people are marked down for death. And at the top of the list was Cicero. And Cicero received this information as he was trying to escape, leaving his villa. The assassins showed up, and Cicero, we are told, very bravely knelt down before one of them and offered his neck, and they brought the blade down and cut off Cicero's head. If you want all the gory details, well, I won't go into all the details, but because Cicero was so well known for his writing, and because he had written so negatively about Mark Antony, Antony ordered that Cicero's hands be chopped off as well, in a symbolic way of saying that he'll never write again. So his head and his hands were sent back to Rome, and they were placed on a rostrum in front of the Roman Senate for everyone to see. And then, according to legend, Mark Antony's wife, who didn't like the things that Cicero used to say about him, she went up there and pulled Cicero's tongue out of his mouth, so of course he would never speak again. So that was the end of the mighty Cicero. He died in 43 BC, 43 years before the Common Era. So anyway, I had an opportunity to get this. This is a wonderful rendering. This seems to be a copy of a very famous bust of Cicero that's been dated to about the 1st century of the Common Era, so, after his death, but it might have been a copy of an original that he may have sat for himself. It's widely regarded that this is a pretty authentic view of what Cicero probably looked like. This is going to go high on my shelf somewhere. I did have an opportunity to get a larger bust of Cicero, one almost life-size, but that would have cut into my book buying budget and possibly caused me to be late on my rent for a couple of months in a row, which would have been a bad thing. But this is just wonderful. I really like this. Cicero, the man of the hour. So anyway, thank you for listening to my ramblings about one of my favorite writers and intellects of all time, Marcus Tullius Cicero. I'll talk to you all later.